On behalf of festival co-directors Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. All our sessions are available to view on our Facebook page, JLF LitFest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur LitFest JLF. Our session today is Intan Paramaditha, the Wandering in Conversation with Shameem Black. What does it mean to forge your own path, and how far and wide can that path take you? In Intan Paramaditha's avant-garde adventure story, the reader is invited to blaze their own trail, to wander everywhere and nowhere, and through it all, to question where and what is home. Through the wandering, this session invites us to explore the politics of travel, turmoil and desire, the freedom and limitations within each of our choices, and the spirit of global nomadism that forever lives at our core. Intan Paramaditha is an Indonesian fiction writer and a lecturer in media and film studies at Macquarie University, Sydney. She is the author of Apple and Knife, and her one novel, The Wandering, won a Pen Translates Award and was published in the UK in February 2020. Shameem Black is a fellow in Gender, Media and Cultural Studies at the Australian National University. Her current work concerns the imaginative life of yoga in a globalizing world. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment section below. In case you have a bandwidth issue, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur LitFest JLF, and in case we drop off, just hang in there, we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Intan Paramaditha, The Wandering in Conversation with Shameem Black. Over to you.
Well, thank you for having us here today. This is really a delight to have a conversation with Intan about her really, really exciting work. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit. First, I think thinking about your novel, The Wandering. It's one that invites us to think about what does it mean to create one's own path, particularly for a female traveler who's coming from Indonesia. And one thing I notice is that oftentimes adventure stories are oftentimes thought of as being linked in some ways to kind of colonial and often very masculine stories and forms of travel. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your protagonist and the kinds of wanderings that are open to her and the kinds of stories you wanted to tell through this novel.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you, Shameem. So maybe just to give a little bit of background for those who haven't read the book, The Wandering. So this is a story about you, meaning the readers, and you are put in the position of a female traveler, well, a third world woman who receives a pair of red shoes from the devil. And then with the pair of red shoes, you can travel, and then you can make choices along the way, and it's a choose your own adventure story. I guess I decided to write a sort of a travel story with third world female protagonist, because most travel stories are about male travelers, well, specifically Anglo-European male travelers, such as the Odyssey, for instance. It's a story of a male adventurer, and women occupy the roles of a seductress, and they distract, right, rather than contribute to the travel in a meaningful way. And then we also know the figure of the flâner, Baudelaire's imagination of the flâner in the 19th century Parisian street. This is also a male figure. And although it was in the 19th century, you could see the manifestations of the flâner figure in contemporary cinema, this kind of male, observant and reflective male travelers, like Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, for instance. There's an American male character wandering in the city, observing, reflecting on his life. And when women travel, the act of travel itself is attached to consumption. So most stories are about wealthy white women who are jet-setting in exotic locations. And we don't really hear many stories of third world women from the global north who ask questions and reflect on their travels. And it seems that the place of the brown women is at home. They are the place to return to. Even I remember some Bollywood films that I watched. The hero is often caught up between the desire for Western modernity, and usually this is embodied in the figure of the white woman who dresses in a provocative way. And then on the other hand, there's this calling to return to the root, to home in India. And usually the embodiment of this is sort of a respectable woman with all the standards of proper femininity. So I feel like I want to tell a story about a third world woman who travels because the third worldness affects the way that the woman perceives travel. So I think for a lot of middle-class families in Western countries, travel is part of Western for their education. I mean, just thinking about the whole history of the Grand Tour. But as someone growing up in Indonesia, that's not really part of my history. Only super rich people can travel. And I received a scholarship, and that's why I could travel. So I guess there's a different perspective when women from the global north travel, the kind of attention or discrimination that she receives when she travel, or in her relationship with others. For instance, some women, they expect to marry a white guy, for instance, to gain sort of a economic or cultural capital. I mean, this is just one aspect, but there are different experiences that shape the way you perceive travel when you travel as a brown woman.
It's all really fascinating, and I think it's so important to have this greater diversity of stories and really take on these questions from these different lenses. And one detail that I think is so striking about how you frame this is the idea of the red shoes. And I'm wondering if you could talk us through a little bit about how that became a kind of signature image of thinking about travel here.
Yeah. So the red shoes, definitely, the red shoes are prominent symbols of travel. And in The Wandering, I'm referring to the story by Hans Christian Andersen. So this story of a young woman, actually. So she is so obsessed with her red shoes, and she wears the red shoes everywhere. Even she goes to the church with the red shoes, and that's not really appropriate in the context of the story. And suddenly she realizes that she just travels or dances everywhere and she can't stop, and she has to have her feet cut off so to save her life, basically. So I see this story as a very interesting story about the desire for mobility. And at the same time, this woman has to be punished because of that desire to explore, to dance, to travel, and that's something I want to reclaim in the stories in the novel The Wandering. So the tagline of the novel is "Good girls go to heaven and bad girls go wandering." So that's, in a way, that's like a celebration of travel, especially for brown women to travel. And on the other hand, as the protagonist walks through different paths, she realizes that it's not as simple as just celebrate your freedom and travel, because she keeps encountering boundaries. She apparently the shoes can take her to different places, but she has no connection because she doesn't have network, she doesn't have social capital, she is excluded from various opportunities because, well, she only has the devil's shoes. So in a way, the travel itself becomes a way for her to learn about the global condition, which is, the more you think about it, it's really inseparable from colonialism. Well, colonialism is still ongoing. So yeah, on the one hand, I guess it's sort of celebration of travel for brown women, because we are often excluded from the act of travel itself. But on the other hand, it's also a novel that asks questions about how to think more critically about travel.
There's so many rich strands here that I want to see if we can explore a little bit. One thing that I think really comes to the fore in this particular moment is the meaning of thinking about travel and the transgressions of travel, as and these amazing possibilities and histories contained within it, in a moment when now so many borders have closed, or mobilities have been limited in some really striking ways. And I'm wondering if you might just reflect a little bit. Obviously, your book was written before this moment, but sort of how we might make sense of it and what it might teach us about the values of mobility in a time when now we have to look quite differently at the ability to cross different kinds of borders or to be in motion.
Yeah, it's probably an archive of the pre-COVID world. Yeah, so I wrote the novel. I started writing the novel in 2008, and I wrote it for 9 years because I kept traveling and I was doing my PhD at that time, so I couldn't really work continuously on the novel. So it took 9 years for me to finish. And the novel came out in Indonesia in 2017. I felt that at that time it was very relevant in asking questions around who can travel, who has the privilege of traveling, who keeps encountering walls and borders. And then when the English edition came out earlier this year, I was in the UK for a book tour, and then the book tour was cancelled because of the COVID-19. So I had to return from London to Sydney. And then at that time, I thought, oh, okay, I guess that's it. People just don't have time to think about travel and mobility. They have bigger issues to think about. This strange thing, this global pandemic, that's more important to think about. And maybe, if they have time, maybe one day they can go back and look at it. But then I guess even though we can't travel, we are in a way, I guess what we are facing right now, all of these sort of inspire us to think about mobility and immobility, and also how technology becomes, we really depend on technology to make connection. So we Zoom each time, and then it just reminds me how everyone engages in the kind of virtual cosmopolitanism, because the actual physical cosmopolitanism is not possible. But that's also a world of exclusion. So for instance, if I have a meeting, if I want to hear presentations from people in Indonesia, it's not really easy if the speakers live in, let's say, a remote area. So bandwidth is a problem, and language is a problem, because, well, yeah, there are Zoom presentation or Zoom or online festivals, but some of them are in English and not everyone can access that. So language and technology, where you live, the kind of network that you have, the barriers are still there. So in a way, mobility is still, or mobility, virtual mobility is also a world of exclusion, just like in the pre-COVID world.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really important moment, exactly when we think about these different ways that people can travel, and the different conditions and assumptions in some ways that travel was based on, that now a real light is kind of shone on. So and I think there's also a real value in being able to have that deep, thinking about the meaning of wandering precisely when it cannot, occur in quite the same ways in which it might have it at a different point in time. And sometimes,
yeah, I don't know. And then I also think a lot about how my work before the coronavirus, my work depended so much on travel, and thinking about the carbon footprints, and so thinking about what we could do in the future to make our travel more responsible. Yeah.
Maybe new kinds of wandering can be built in the future, and rethought in some ways through precisely the kinds of expanded lenses that your writing brings to it. I wanted to maybe ask you about a slightly different dimension here, which is the form that you've chosen to tell this story, that it draws on the choose your own adventure model, which is one that I remember from my childhood of reading many wonderful books. And what I mostly remember about reading these books, when I would go through, I would choose, choosing a particular pathway, and usually the protagonist I was following ended up in dying, or in some kind of coming to some kind of end. At which point I would have to go back to the beginning to and try again and go through. And so that practice of reading, which was so different from many other more conventional novels, has really stayed with me. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came to work with that form, and what attracts you to it as a writer, and how you see it working in the new way that you're using it.
Yeah. So, well, just like you, I was also drawn to this kind of structure. So when I was much younger, maybe in my early 20s, I wanted to write a novel with this kind of format. But at that time, I thought I didn't have a strong story to tell. So it felt like maybe just like a gimmick. So I just abandoned the idea. And then when I became you could say a traveler. At that time, in around 2008, I lived in the United States, and then I went back to Indonesia, and I felt, coming back to Indonesia, it felt really strange, because I felt like I was caught up between two different cultures. I was sort of in between. By the way, the title of the novel in Indonesian language is Gentayangan, which is the wandering, but we use the Gentayangan to describe ghosts who are in between, like between the world of the living and the world of the dead. So yeah, that's like a metaphor I used to talk about in-betweenness. So anyway, I wanted to write a novel that reflects on the idea of travel, and then I went back to the idea of that I had earlier, using the choose your own adventure structure. So yeah, I feel like I really like the idea, because I can play with the notion of the multiple selves, because there are 15 different plots in the book, and in each plot you live your life as a particular person, and you make choices that are different from the choices that you will make in the other path. So I like playing around with that idea. Also, the structure allows parallel structure and the idea of mirror, because one path can be an inverted mirror of another path. And in The Wandering, you meet the same characters in different paths, but they're not really the same. They're just different versions. So there's this character called Grandma Victoria, and you will meet her in one path in the Netherlands, but she will also show up in New York as probably a different person, but you'll never know. Maybe a ghost. You're not sure. Also, when you travel, I don't know if you experience this often, but I often feel like I've been in a place before, like a deja vu, like, hey, I think I've been here before, or I've experienced this before, but when? And yeah, I think the multiple plots allow me to play around with this notion of deja vu, how you think that you have passed a particular path before, but you're not really sure. And I guess I've heard some readers talking about it's quite disorienting because I'm not sure if I have passed this path before, or maybe not. I'm not really sure. So a lot of confusion, which I think can be quite playful.
And it's sort of, I think, important, I think, to disorient readers and take them into unexpected spaces, and where they might see things again from those different perspectives, with that sense of being both familiar and uncannily, uncannily familiar, as well as strange at the same time. Mm-hmm. There's I think that question a little bit about these uncanny worlds, and is something, I think that would be I think really interesting to explore in some of I know your work has been interested in looking at some of the different kinds of fantasies that are out there, whether they're fantasies coming from folk tales, fairy tales. You've mentioned the red shoes, from horror stories, and across a lot of your different writing. And I'm wondering if we could go a little bit more deeply into some of those influences on this novel, and some of the places that you've maybe turned for inspiration, or how you've wanted to work with some of those literary traditions in this choose your own adventure format.
Yeah, I guess we talked about this last year. We were in a panel about gender, and then I talked a bit about the fairy tales. Yeah, I think I'm very much inspired by fairy tales, folk tales, whether they are Indonesian or Western. Because I could see some similarities, especially in how women are portrayed. I like the horrific aspect of fairy tales. Like there's a lot of horror there, and I guess in my first book translated into English, Apple and Knife, we can see the horror element quite prominently, because I feel like horror is a place of subversion, a place where you can feel disturbed, and I think it's good to be disturbed, and you start asking questions around your assumptions. But yeah, so fairy tales, and I am specifically drawn to bad women in fairy tales, because there are a lot of them, so many bad women in fairy tales, in Indonesia, and also in other fairy tales, and they are often punished in the most horrible ways. And I guess what I like doing in my writing is how these women embrace their punishment in monstrous ways. So there's a lot of blood and revenge. So the same thing goes to the wandering. So this protagonist knows that she is already cursed to wander, because well, what can you do if your boyfriend is the devil and you are cursed to wander? Well, you have no choice. So what she does actually is embracing this idea of being cursed, and then she just starts wandering. So there's a lot of I would say references to for instance, The Wizard of Oz, and also not only fairy tales, but also stories like The Wizard of Oz, the Red Shoes, The Wizard of Oz, and then the Indonesian version of this kind of wandering figure, Malin Kundang, who leaves his village to, well, basically just to have adventure, and then apparently he breaks many hearts, including his mother, and he's turned into a stone when he returns. So yeah, I just play around with these stories, and then reframe them, just to put them in the contemporary context, and maybe just reframing is a way of re-questioning, I guess. Yes, and that's what I like doing.
It's something that I think is raises so many important questions, and I know one thing in some of your writing you've really looked at is the question of how women are often positioned against each other, often in contexts where they have to compete for resources, or they are made to enact violence against each other. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about how about these questions of gender and violence and how you see them playing out in something like The Wandering.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. Well, we talked about my rewriting of Cinderella, I guess. That was last year, how women are put in the marketplace and they had to be competing against each other. And in The Wandering, I guess this idea of good girls go to heaven, bad girls go wandering, it actually responds to the kind of, I would say, violent campaign in Indonesia, which started maybe in the past 10 years with the rise of religious conservatism. So we had political reform in early 2000, but then with the rise of conservative religious groups, we have to face a lot of campaigns like, okay, so just stay at home and be a good mother and wife, and then you will reach heaven. So that kind of rhetoric, framed in a sort of Islamic way, but of course this has received a lot of criticism from Muslims, critical Muslims. But there's this rhetoric of heaven that's really prominent in the public sphere, and so it's a you can say that it's a response. It's a rejection towards that kind of framing that basically confines women in the domestic sphere. But at the same time, in the novel, I guess I'm also trying to find ways to sort of find connection between women, even though that connection is not really clear. So the protagonist has a sister who is more conservative. She sells hijab. She is into Muslim fashion business. She's more conservative than her, but eventually there are places where they can actually have a dialogue, and I like having presenting these moments, because it's not always about clashes and tension. There's also ways of engaging with dialogue, even though these women are different.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important that to be able to have readers to really think about these different sides and the opportunities for new kinds of connection that emerge in these relationships. I just wanted to pick up on one thing you mentioned about the expectation in many ways that women stay at home, that a kind of a pious life involves oftentimes being oriented to those kinds of spaces in certain respects, or to domestic roles, familial roles, and in religious contexts. And I wanted to ask a little bit about how perhaps you see yourself redefining home through the question of wandering, and whether there are new ways of being at home through these alternatives that you're imagining.
Yeah, I guess traveling really shapes the way I think about home, and I think maybe it happens to you too, because you've been traveling as well, and the distance allows me to think about home in a more critical way. And what I like about it is that I see home in a more complex way. It's not something fixed or unchanged, but it's something that keeps evolving, and probably I am not really grasping the changes, but it's a good thing. So it's not something stable, and so you keep learning. And also this separation, this dichotomy between home and away, I think it's the more I travel, the more I realize that the dichotomy needs to be disturbed, because what happens at home is really affected by what happens outside, by the global forces. Well, people who do not have access to travel, well, maybe in the pre-COVID world, they also try to participate in the global culture by being like a whole cosmopolitan at home, and their actions are really affected by travel and mobility, even though they themselves do not travel. So I feel like travel has allowed me to think about home in a more complex way, and definitely moving away from this idea of the nation as something coherent. I think it's I think it's a good thing to think about home, nation, and root in a more nuanced way.
And finding these new expanded possibilities, absolutely, and within these uncertainties.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, you mentioned that this is a book that you took a long time to write, and really it went through a number of different ways of rethinking. And I'd love, could you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the things that you found most challenging about writing this story, and particular questions that you really had to grapple with in bringing it to fruition?
I guess I don't know. I guess every part of it was challenging. I guess how to actually look at. So the way I wrote it was like I wrote some sort of a diagram, like a map showing, okay, these are the options and these are the consequences, and then I started writing the option. The individual options. And of course, I kept revising the map because the stories developed. I found that just trying to make the each path not too messy, or well, maybe I hate the word coherent, but yeah, just trying to make that not messy and like sort of quite logical. That's a challenge. And also the process of translating the work itself. So the translator, Stephen Epstein, is the translator of the novel and also my previous work, Apple and Knife. Even though he's the translator, the process is also quite challenging. It was quite challenging because it was more collaborative, and so a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversations happened, and the thinking process was more challenging as well. So I felt like, this is like writing another novel, like bringing that work into English. Yeah, so I guess those are some of the challenges I had.
I'm curious about that. Do you think that your novel offers something different in Indonesian than it does in English, or that it speaks to readers who are reading it in Indonesian differently than readers coming to the English translation?
No, because I guess in terms of well, we added a little bit and then we removed a little bit just for the sake of readership. So the changes are not that many, but I think maybe in terms of how people approach the novel, because the readers are very different. They bring their own interpretation culturally. There's there's a review of The Wandering just came out a few days ago, and then by Lara Norgard, and she writes that, okay, as a white woman reading this book and put in the subjectivity of a brown woman, it seems that I'm looking for some sort of structure and rules and regulations, and then I follow the rules and then I die. So I guess like it's really interesting how some people reflect on their choices, the choices that they make, how they are probably related to their own experiences, to who they are, how they are, their upbringing, for instance.
That often different readers are going to project in different kinds of ideas or come away with different experiences in this multiplicity. I think there's something about the form that really, kind of it gives us a lot of room to think about that, about choosing adventures has, many different ramifications, both the adventures that are provided in the novel, but also the kinds of choices that different readers might make, or the kinds of frameworks that they might bring into the novel.
Yeah, although there are also readers who decided to read the novel from cover to cover, like not making choices, but from the beginning to the end. Well, that's a possibility.
That's actually really fascinating. Was that something that you thought about when you were writing, about how people would go through it, and whether they might follow the what's set out for them, or choose something quite different?
Actually, the readers are kind of wild. I thought they would. Okay, in order to fully experience the novel, you need to unpack all the options so that you can see, there are characters who would reappear in other plots and so on. But readers are they can do whatever they want. So some readers, they do that. They're obsessed with the whole plot. But they're also the ones who, okay, I'll just read from cover to cover. And then there are also readers who said, okay, I've finished one storyline and then I don't have time. So because it's too demanding. So I will stop and then maybe I'll continue next month. Okay. So there are different ways of reading it. And I really have no control. I think it's really up to the reader.
It's kind of, I think, fantastic in the way in which it offers these very nonlinear experiences, or in some ways almost the most conventional way of, starting at page 1 and ending at page, whatever is actually in some ways a kind of transgressive way of reading in this sort of structure. So I think it's fabulous how it's playing with so many different expectations that readers might have, both in terms of the content, but also in terms of the very meaning of reading in this day and age. And I guess that's one, maybe one sort of final thing that we can really think about is perhaps the very idea of readership and reading, especially long form work in this age that is, it seems very digital and very oriented towards, very short, forms that are on social media or things like that. And I'm just wondering if we could, maybe reflect a little bit on that. The what you see as the value of reading in our contemporary moment.
I think people still, I think more people are into novels than short stories. I don't know why, but I've read a lot of reviews saying that, I'm not really into short story collections, because when you read a short story collection, you have to sort of begin again. Right? Mm-hmm. You finish one story and you begin again, you enter the world of fiction, and then you get to know the characters. So it's quite, in a way, tiring. And I guess that's what's happening to when people read The Wandering. It can be disorienting, and people can get tired reading it. So, but yeah, that's okay. It's an experiment. Experiments can fail, but I do think that people are still enthusiastic about readings, and also digital media help, because people share their interest. They share the books that they love. I mean, I think the profession of a book blogger or book Instagrammer, I mean, that's a profession that emerged due to the development of digital media. So I don't think that the reading habit is dying down. I think it's still very much alive. Yeah.
Being kind of reformed in new ways, much as maybe the idea of travel is kind of reformed in some new ways here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, what kinds of projects are you interested in doing in the future, and what kind of directions do you think you want to go in your work?
Yeah, so I am currently starting a new novel, but I guess I'm just going to share my latest project, which is coming out hopefully end of this year. It's with the Tilted Axis Press. They have a series of chapbooks called Translating Feminisms. So they translate works, poems and maybe some stories by women writers from Asia. And so I'm curating and editing the one from Indonesia, featuring Indonesian women poets in translation, and I'm really excited. And currently, because this is Women in Translation Month, they're running a campaign on Kickstarter to fund the project. So yeah, please do fund the project, Translating Feminisms.
Very exciting. Yeah, I think that'd be a wonderful thing to look forward to, and for people to come in and really be a part of supporting and putting, making it possible for those voices to come forward.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Well, I think we have reached the end of our time here. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation. I think these are such wonderful, exciting projects that you're offering with all these really rich stories. So I look forward to seeing all the things that are going to unfold in the future as well.
Thanks so much, Shameem. I'm glad we finally had the chance to talk again. Yeah.
Yes, it's really lovely.
Great.
Thank you, Intan. Thank you, Shameem, for that wonderful session. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. The books are available online, so go right out there and pick it up and get your sense of what is home for you. If you've enjoyed this conversation, I do hope you'll block back at 8:30 p.m. for our next session, The Making of Modern Britain, Andrew Marr in conversation with Swapan Dasgupta. From Sylvia Plath to Elvis Costello, Frank Richlow to Bob Geldof, Zaha Hadid to James Dyson, David Attenborough to the Beatles. Each one of them has contributed in shaping the story of the modern United Kingdom. In this conversation with Marr, Swapan Dasgupta discusses the living history of modern Britain and reveals how artists, innovators, and activists define the new era and how Britain's past has shaped the 80s and the 90s. See you at 8:30.